Picture a factory, not a glamorous one. Low buildings, spread out across a huge fenced site, mostly quiet, with far fewer people than a site that size should have. It makes a product every army on Earth needs, in a business with guaranteed demand and almost no competitors. On paper, it sounds like the most secure manufacturing business imaginable. One product, endless need, hardly any rivals. It is not. It might be the single most fragile major industrial business in the entire economy, and the reasons why turn everything you would assume about it upside down. This is a factory that can be the only one of its kind in an entire country, that spends most of its life running far below capacity, that gets paid to stay warm rather than to produce, that has exactly one customer who can also be its regulator, and that sits on so much empty land that the real estate around it is worth more than the business inside it. Here is the fact that reframes it. This is not really a business that sells a product. It is a capability a nation pays to keep alive, whether it is busy or not. Because the alternative, not having it at all, is unthinkable. And like every strategic capability in this series, its economics look nothing like a normal factory's. This is the full ledger. Why one plant can be the only one, why it is spread across enormous empty land, why it earns almost nothing most of the time, why its single customer is also its greatest risk, the brutal feast and famine of its demand, and the strange reason a nation keeps paying for a factory that mostly sits still. Let me open the ledger. The only one of its kind. Start with the fact that breaks every normal assumption about manufacturing. For many specific products this kind of plant makes, there may be only one plant in the entire country that makes it. Think about how strange that is. Almost everything else you own was made in a world of competing factories, many suppliers, many countries, redundancy everywhere. If one factory closes, another fills the gap. That is how normal industrial supply works, and it is why you rarely think about it. This corner of manufacturing is the opposite. Some specialized products are made at a single site, by a single workforce, on a single set of production lines, for an entire nation. There is no second plant to pick up the slack. There is no competitor down the road. If that one plant stops, for any reason, the country's supply of that item stops with it. There is no import that quietly fills the gap either, because the very reason a nation keeps its own plant is to not depend on anyone else for something this vital. So the single site is not just the cheapest source or the best source. For that item, in that country, it is the only source, and everyone responsible knows it. Why does it end up this way? Because the demand, in peacetime, is not big enough to support many plants. The barriers to building one are enormous, and the work is specialized enough that expertise concentrates in very few places. So instead of a healthy field of competitors, you get one irreplaceable site carrying an entire national need on its shoulders. That single fact, one plant, no backup, changes the economics of everything that follows. It means the plant is not just a business, it is a national choke point. And a choke point is valued and feared in a completely different way from an ordinary factory. Why it is spread across empty land. Now look at the site itself, because it explains a huge part of the cost. An ammunition plant does not look like a normal factory, a big shed packed with machines and people. It looks like a small industrial town, scattered thinly across an enormous piece of land. Buildings sit far apart from one another, separated by wide empty spaces, connected by long internal roads, the whole thing wrapped in a security perimeter that can run for miles. There is a reason for that spread, and it is the same reason the weapons depot is mostly empty. Safety distance. When you work with hazardous material in quantity, everything has to be separated from the public and from itself, so that a problem at any one point stays at that one point. Each building sits inside its own required buffer of empty ground. Those buffers cannot overlap with anything that matters. And the result is a facility whose actual working structures might occupy a small fraction of the site, with the vast majority being land that exists purely to be empty. So the plant carries the same strange cost as the depot. It ties up an enormous footprint of land, most of which produces nothing and can never be used for anything else, purely to provide the separation that makes the work possible at all. You are not paying for a factory. You are paying for a factory plus a huge permanent moat of emptiness around every part of it. And that land, as with everything in this series, is both the plant's protection and its temptation, a point we will come back to. The one fire that ends everything? Here is the risk that sits underneath the whole business, and it follows directly from the first two facts. You have a single irreplaceable plant. It handles hazardous material, which is exactly why it is spread across all that empty land. Put those two together, and you get a very specific, very serious vulnerability. A single serious accident at that one site does not just cause damage. It can remove an entire nation's supply of something in an instant. Think about how few industries carry that shape of risk. A car plant burning down is a disaster for its owner and its workers, but the country still has cars because a dozen other plants keep building them. A single-site national capability has no such cushion. The fire, the flood, the one bad day does not merely dent a balance sheet. It erases a strategic capability and erases it precisely when the empty land that was supposed to contain the damage has done its job of saving lives, but cannot save the capability itself. This is the nightmare that shapes everything about how these plants are run. A reason for the obsessive separation, the buffers, the empty land, the rigorous procedures, is not only to protect the surrounding public, though it is that, it is also to protect the plant from itself, to make sure that a problem in one building cannot cascade and take out the whole site, because the whole site is all there is. So, an enormous amount of the plant's cost goes not into making things, but into making sure nothing goes catastrophically wrong. Separation, safety systems, procedures, the constant vigilance. In a normal factory, safety is a cost of doing business. Here, safety is close to the entire business, because the thing being protected is not just this year's output. It is the continued existence of the only plant a country has. That inverts the whole economic picture. You are not looking at a factory optimized to produce as much as possible as cheaply as possible. You are looking at a facility optimized, above all, to never suffer the one failure it cannot recover from. And that is a very expensive way to run anything. The one customer problem. Now the demand side, which is just as strange as the supply side. For the core of what this kind of plant makes, there is one core customer. Its buyer is the state. A nation's own military and government are the buyer, often the only legal buyer, for the plant's primary output. And a business with exactly one customer is in a fundamentally different position from a normal company. When you have one customer, you have no market power. You cannot shop your product around, cannot play buyers against each other, cannot walk away from a bad deal. Your single customer sets the terms, the volumes, the price, and the schedule. If they want less this year, your revenue collapses and you have nowhere else to sell. If they want more, you scramble. You do not run your own business. You dance to the rhythm of one buyer's needs. And it goes deeper, because that single customer is usually also your regulator, your licensor, and the authority that controls whether you are even allowed to operate. That same entity which buys your product also decides the rules you must follow, the standards you must meet, and whether your license continues. There is no appealing to the market against them, because they are the market, and the referee, and the rulemaker all at once. This is the exact opposite of a healthy business. A strong company has many customers, so no single one can dictate to it. This plant has one, who holds every card. Its entire commercial life is a relationship with a single powerful buyer who can decide its fate outright, which raises the obvious question. Why would anyone want to own a business like that? And the answer is the strangest part of all: feast and famine. Here is the rhythm of the money, and it is brutal. Demand for what this plant makes is not steady. It is wildly, violently uneven, tied to events no business can control or predict. In quiet years, peacetime, low tension, full stockpiles, demand can be minimal. A plant runs far below its capacity, lines sit idle, and the business earns a fraction of what it could. Then something changes in the world. Tension rises, stockpiles need refilling. A conflict erupts somewhere, and suddenly the demand for the plant's output can spike enormously, almost overnight, far beyond what the plant can quickly produce. Those same lines that sat idle for years are now the most important industrial capacity in the country and cannot be scaled fast enough. This is the feast and famine that defines the whole business. long stretches of famine where the plant is an expensive, underused burden, punctuated by sudden feasts where it is priceless and overwhelmed. No normal business could survive that pattern on its own. You cannot lay off your entire specialized workforce during the famine and magically rehire and retrain them the instant the feast arrives. You cannot dismantle the lines to save money and rebuild them overnight when they are needed. A capability has to exist continuously, through all the lean years, so that it is there in the sudden year it becomes vital. And that is the crux of the entire problem. A capability that must exist continuously, but is only needed only occasionally, cannot pay for itself through normal sales. Something has to fund it through the famine, and that something is the same answer as the whole strategic cluster. Paid to stay warm. Here is how a business that cannot survive on its own sales survives anyway. A nation pays it to exist, not just to produce. Because the alternative is catastrophic, if the plant were left to survive on peacetime sales alone, it would close during a long, quiet stretch. The workforce would scatter, the expertise would evaporate, and the lines would go cold. Then, when the sudden crisis came and the country desperately needed output, there would be no plant, no workers, no capability, and no way to build it back in time. A capability lost in peacetime cannot be recovered in the emergency that needs it. So, a nation does something that makes no ordinary commercial sense. It pays to keep the plant warm. It funds the maintenance of the lines, the retention of the core skilled workforce, and the readiness of the facility through the lean years when the plant is barely producing, precisely so that the capability is there, intact and ready, when it is suddenly needed. Payment is not for this year's output. It is for the guarantee of next decade's capacity. This is the same logic as the warm tank factory, the mothballed airfield, and the fuel reserve applied to manufacturing. A real product of an ammunition plant, most of the time, is not ammunition. It is readiness. Just the standing ability to produce, held in reserve, funded continuously, and cashed in only when the world turns dangerous. You are paying, year after quiet year, for a promise that if the day comes, the lines will run. That reframes what the plant even is. It is not a factory that occasionally goes quiet. It is a national insurance policy that occasionally, when the alarm sounds, turns out to also be a factory. What you inherit. Suppose you took on one of these. What comes attached? First, the workforce problem. A core skill of running these lines safely is rare, specialized, and slow to build. You cannot advertise for it casually, and you cannot rebuild it quickly if it disperses. Holding that workforce together through the lean years, when there is barely enough work to justify it, is one of the central burdens and one of the main reasons the state pays to keep the plant warm. Second, the safety and regulatory weight. This is one of the most heavily scrutinized kinds of site there is, and rightly so. Compliance, inspections, the procedures, the documentation, the constant demonstration that nothing will go wrong. All of it is continuous and expensive, and none of it is optional. Third, the environmental inheritance. Like the shipyard, the base, and the old airfield, a site that has handled hazardous material for decades carries an environmental history in its soil and water. That legacy is a real, and sometimes enormous, liability that transfers with the site and does not care whether the plant is currently busy or idle. Fourth, the aging infrastructure. Many of these plants are old, built in a previous era of need, and the cost of modernizing specialized, safety-critical industrial lines is vast. You inherit not just the capability, but the bill for keeping decades-old critical infrastructure fit to operate. Fifth, the single customer relationship itself, with all the vulnerability that carries. You inherit a business whose entire fate rests on staying in the good graces of one powerful buyer who is also your regulator. None of these is a normal business risk. Together, they are why almost nobody would take this on as a purely commercial venture, and why these plants so often end up owned or underwritten by the state itself. The trap. The trap here is the same one that has haunted this whole strategic cluster, and the ammunition plant may be its clearest case. Its land is worth more than the business, and cashing it in ends the capability. Remember, the enormous, mostly empty site, all that land, held for safety separation, is real estate. And over time, as towns grow and land becomes scarce, that huge tract can become worth an extraordinary amount, often far more than the struggling feast and famine business sitting on it earns in years. So the temptation writes itself. A plant barely makes money most of the time. Land it sits on is worth a fortune. Why not close the marginal plant, sell the valuable land, take the gain, and source the product elsewhere or worry about it later? Every step of that logic is financially reasonable in the short term. And every step of it is irreversible, because the moment the land is sold and developed, the safety separation is gone and can never be recreated near anywhere useful. A specialized workforce disperses and does not come back. A capability that took generations and a fortune to build is closed, permanently, for a one-time real estate gain. And if the day ever comes when the country needs that plant and finds a housing estate where it used to be, there is no check that rebuilds it in time. A second trap is subtler and just as dangerous. It is letting the capability hollow out while pretending it is intact. A plant stays open on paper, but the investment is quietly cut. The workforce ages without replacement. The lines are not modernized. The readiness erodes year by year. Nobody decides to lose the capability. It just quietly rots behind a door that still says the plant is operational, until the day it is tested and cannot deliver. How it is done well. So how does a nation keep a capability like this alive without either wasting fortunes or letting it decay? First, they are honest that it is insurance, not a business, and they fund it as insurance. They accept that in quiet years it will look like a waste, and they pay for the readiness anyway, because the whole point is to have it before it is needed, not to conjure it afterward. Second, they protect the workforce deliberately. They find ways to keep the core skilled people employed and their expertise alive through the lean years, treating the human capability as the irreplaceable asset it is, not as a cost to be trimmed the moment orders dip. Third, they hold the land and the separation absolutely, resisting the constant pressure to sell the valuable empty ground, because they understand that the emptiness is not waste, it is the thing that makes the whole operation possible and can never be rebuilt. Fourth, they keep investing in the lines and the safety systems even when it is not obviously necessary, because a plant that is allowed to age into fragility is a capability that exists only on paper. Fifth, they plan for the feast during the famine. They think hard, in the quiet years, about how the plant would actually scale up in a crisis, what it would need, how fast it could respond, so that the surge capacity is real and not a hopeful assumption. Sixth, and above all, they never mistake a long peace for proof that the capability was unnecessary. Quiet years are not evidence the insurance was wasted. They are exactly the years the insurance is being paid for. The verdict. So, could you own an ammunition plant? Its strategic core, no. Like the tank factory, the dry dock, the boneyard, the weapons depot, the fuel reserve, and the mothballed airfield, it is national capability, held or underwritten by the state, because a country cannot let the only source of something vital be closed by a bad quarter or a tempting land deal. This whole thing exists outside normal market logic, and it is kept for reasons no balance sheet fully captures. There are real commercial defense manufacturers, of course, and pieces of this industry do trade and operate as genuine businesses. But the deeper into the irreplaceable, single plant, single customer core you go, the less it behaves like a company, and the more it behaves like a national institution wearing a company's clothes. Here is the good year, and note how strange it is. It is not a year of booming sales. It is a quiet, stable year where the plant is kept warm at a sensible cost. The workforce is retained, the lines are maintained, the land and separation are protected, the safety record is spotless, and the capability sits ready and intact. Nothing dramatic happens, and that is the success. A nation holds a vital capability, in good order, for another year, against a day it hopes never comes. And here is the bad year. Either the crisis arrives and finds the capability hollowed out, the workforce gone, the lines aged, the readiness a fiction, so the plant cannot surge when everything depends on it, or the reverse. A long peace, a tight budget, a valuable piece of land, and the plant is quietly closed and sold for a gain that looks smart, right up until the moment, years later, when it turns out to have been the sale of something that could never be bought back. Same plant. What separates them is whether a nation understood it was buying insurance and had the discipline to keep paying for it through all the years it seemed unnecessary. Every other factory in the world is judged by what it produces, its output, its efficiency, its margin, its throughput. An ammunition plant, at its strategic core, is judged by something almost opposite, by whether it is still there, still capable, still ready, on the one unpredictable day a nation reaches for it in earnest, after years of looking like an expensive, underused, faintly pointless thing that a sensible accountant would have shut down long ago. That is the cruel arithmetic of it. Its finest possible history is one where it was maintained at great cost through decades of quiet, and the crisis it was kept for never came, so that from the outside, the whole expensive enterprise looks, forever, like money spent on nothing. You are not buying a factory that makes a product. You are buying a nation's promise that if the terrible day ever arrives, the lines will still run, and the price of that promise is paying, year after quiet year, to keep alive a capability whose greatest success is to be needed as rarely as possible, and ideally, never at all.